So this is the ASUS ROG Scar 17, and I've already reviewed it. When I reviewed it, I declared it the fastest gaming laptop of 2023, and it was rocking a Ryzen 9 7745HX CPU paired with an RTX 4090. Well, this is the exact same laptop and the exact same GPU, but instead of using the 7945HX CPU, it's using the 7945HX 3D CPU, the one with 3D V-cache that's been implemented. We've seen this on the desktops. It does make a difference in certain situations. And for those of you unfamiliar with 3D V-cache, think of it as a secondary L3 cache that the CPU has access to. But the benefit is that the cache is on top of the CPU die, so it has quicker access to it. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with cache, usually there's 3 levels of it: L1, L2, L3. L1 being the fastest, right? But the fastest cache usually has the smallest amount of space. L2 is a bit bigger, but obviously a little bit slower. L3 is the biggest, but it's the slowest. But the thing is, it's still way faster than system memory, especially when you have it on top of the CPU. And when there's very little latency, it makes a difference in certain games because some of the things that are happening in that game are very consistent. So it doesn't have to go out of the L3 cache to system memory to grab it because it can store it directly in there, and then you just get better performance. Now, this doesn't translate to faster performance in everything I've tested, but in some situations, there's a nice difference having that 3D after the processor name. Now, I'm not gonna go too crazy into this laptop again because I've already reviewed it, but this is a 17-inch notebook. It's about 3 kilograms, not as heavy as Intel's debut of their fastest laptop, the MSI Titan GT77, a lot lighter. It's thinner too, which is great, and you still have a ton of I/O. For example, on the left-hand side, you have your USB-A ports, your audio jack, and then on the back, you have the rest of your I/O. So your power connector with a massive 330-watt brick. You have your 2.5 gigabit RJ45 port, HDMI, you have 2 Type-C ports. One of them will let you connect directly to the GPU. Now, obviously, it has a big 17-inch display. It is 16:9, and as you can see here, AMD is advertising the 3D V-cache. It's 128 megabytes, so that's a lot of space to have access to. And then, of course, you have that same keyboard, black deck, very rubberized. You can see it definitely picks up a lot of grease because it has that like rubberized texture. Keyboards are nice and clicky. They're not mechanical, but they feel pretty thick. So like it feels like a proper gaming keyboard. Touchpad's a little bit on the smaller side, but I feel like most people buying this laptop is probably buying it to replace a desktop or using some sort of third-party mouse. Now, this is a laptop that doesn't have the best front-facing webcam. It's only 720p. So for some weird reason, the camera app is not picking up the microphone. I don't know why. It's on, so I had to use Audacity to record my voice. Anyways, this is what the microphone sounds like. This display is not mini LED or OLED or anything like that. It's an IPS panel, but it's 240 hertz. Screen brightness is okay. It's not like super bright or anything, but color accuracy is good, and color gamut is also fantastic. Now, the best way to show performance on this laptop is to compare it to the previous ASUS ROG Scar 17 with the exact same CPU without the 3D V-cache, and I'm also comparing it to the MSI Titan GT77, which has Intel's fastest processor, the i9-13980HX CPU. All of these laptops have 32 gigabytes of RAM, and all of them are using RTX 4090s, and they can all boost up to 175 watts. Now, when it comes to single core clock speeds, again, Intel is still the king in this department. They've been the king of single core clock speeds for years, but AMD has come up a long way with their faster speeds, but it's still not as fast as Intel's. This single core clock speed is very similar to the previous ROG Scar 17, so there's not much of a difference there. Multi-core speeds, this is the fastest multi-core speeds I've ever seen on a laptop. This Scar 17 and the previous Scar 17 are pretty close in performance, with the Intel laptop trailing slightly behind. So far I haven't seen much difference with the 3D V-cache. Even when I do Mozilla Firefox compile test, all of these laptops were able to compile Mozilla Firefox in just 11 minutes. Now, there are some instances where the new Scar 17 with 3D V-cache does make a difference. When I was using Adobe Premiere Pro, the new version, the 3D V-cache Vcache model performed the fastest out of the three. It wasn't by a mile, but it was noticeable when you're doing these tests. Now, if you're talking about Adobe Photoshop, they all performed very well, but the two AMD models outperformed the Intel version. And the same holds true when you're talking about Adobe After Effects. But the one area where I saw a big difference, at least to the previous ROG 7745HX, was with DaVinci Resolve. It was just slightly faster with the 3D Vcache model compared to the previous one. Blender was actually a good example of where this model did come out ahead. Instead of, rendering all the scenes with the GPU, I wanted to do it with the CPU because it was a longer process, and I wanted to see if I went on longer and there were some assets that maybe have been similar, how this 3D Vcache model would perform, and it came out on top compared to the other two models. Now, when it comes to compressing and uncompressing files, AMD tends to have the faster processors for it, and the 7745HX was obviously faster than the Intel model, but this 3D Vcache version was faster than both of those laptops, which I was really impressed to see. Now, PCMark 10 tests a bunch of general stuff like productivity, idle time, video conferencing, and this laptop came out on top. It had slightly higher score, but it was significant enough to see an improvement compared to the other two laptops. When it came to 3D Mark Time Spy, I wanted to see if there was a difference in terms of GPU performance. Maybe the CPU could help it out a bit, but I didn't see much of a difference. In fact, the previous ASUS Scar ROG 17 with the regular Ryzen 9 7945HX actually had the highest score. Now, gaming is where I saw the biggest difference, having a CPU with 3D Vcache built in. Now, not every game was faster. Like, there was a couple of games where the PC did a little bit better of a job. Some games where things were neck and neck, but F122, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and of course, Cyberpunk was way faster on this 7945HX 3D version compared to the other two laptops. And this also translated over to QHD gaming as well. You just usually, for the most part, depending on the game, had a faster experience using this version of the 7945HX compared to the other laptops. Now, this always doesn't translate into faster performance. It really depends on how CPU intensive these games are, but it does make a difference. Like, if you want the fastest CPU in a laptop for gaming, it's definitely this guy. Like, it completely beats out the other two laptops. Now, I had to check the CPU temps because I figured, like, 3D Vcache, there's gonna be more heat, it's gonna perform a little bit hotter, but to my surprise, all three laptops were neck and neck in terms of actual temperatures. That was great to see. But the average core clock speeds is where the story really takes place, because the Intel laptop struggles. Like, under that type of load, the CPU just gets way too hot. The efficiency just isn't there, and it has to completely reduce the average core clock speeds in order to keep the temperatures in line. These guys, the AMD laptops, totally different story. Average core clock speeds were consistently in the 4000 megahertz range the entire time. That is a lot faster compared to what this Intel was doing, especially if you're doing anything that takes a long time, like rendering a file or doing any sort of CPU intensive task. That kind of extra performance does make a big difference. Now, fan noise on this guy is actually pretty similar to the previous ASUS ROG Scar 17, so nothing new there. But yeah, it even has the same speaker setup, with the majority of them being on the bottom. Now, I do want to mention that this does have a mux switch like the other two laptops, but it does require a reboot. Now, as I mentioned in my previous ROG Scar 17 video, be careful when you take off the lid. There's these cables here that activate the RGB. You don't want to just rip it off because you'll rip these cables. But once you're in, it's identical. There's no difference. You still have a vapor chamber cooler. I always appreciate the art that's embedded on the plate. I think it looks super cool. You have 2 slots for RAM, upgradable to 64. 1 drive slot over here, which gets good read and write speeds, and a second slot located on the left side of the battery. Now, battery life was actually the worst with the previous 7745HX. This 3D Vcache model gets slightly better battery life, but the Intel laptop that I tested surprisingly had the best battery life out of the 3. So hands down, this is the fastest gaming laptop I've tested this year. In fact, it's probably the fastest gaming laptop on the market right now. And the 3D Vcache does make a difference in some of the games you play. Not all the games, but some of the games you do see a nice CPU performance uplift. Now, here's what I have to say. If you are considering this laptop, it depends on the price. Like, if it's significantly more expensive than the regular 7945HX, I don't think it's really worth it. But if it's like slightly more expensive, maybe 50 bucks more expensive, then yeah, I do think it's worth it. You're getting a faster processor. You're just getting the fastest gaming laptop period you can get. And for a lot of you guys out there who want a desktop replacement, this is the one to look at. Also, if you travel and you move around every 6 months or so and can't build a PC, this would be a good option too. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.